Well, good morning. I'm going to go ahead and get us started, though this being Washington, I'm quite sure we'll have people continue to trickle in for the next several hours, probably. I'm Bob Hathaway. It's my good fortune to be the director of the Asia program and the Pakistan program here at the Wilson Center. There are a number of new faces in the audience here, and on top of that, we are webcasting this, and I have a suspicion there are a number of people in Pakistan and elsewhere who are watching this who might not know much about the Woodrow Wilson Center. So if you will permit me just a minute or so to introduce the center to you. We are an independent, nonpartisan institute for advanced study located here in the heart of Washington. We were created by the U.S. Congress in 1968 as the nation's official memorial to President Woodrow Wilson. As some of you perhaps know, Woodrow Wilson was and remains the only American president to have earned a Ph.D. We seek to promote research and writing and dialogue on current issues of importance to the nation and the world and their historical and cultural background. We, on an annual basis, bring nearly 150 visiting scholars to the Wilson Center, where they produce an extraordinary wealth of books and articles. We organize nearly 800 meetings a year, such as this one, and we strive to serve as a bridge between the world of the scholar and the world of the policymaker. In other words, to commemorate both the scholarly depth and the public policy concerns of President Wilson. Several years ago, the Wilson Center made a decision to substantially increase the attention we pay to Pakistan. One indication of that heightened interest is the appointment on an annual basis of a Pakistan scholar who spends 9 or 10 months each year with us working on a book. Our most recent Pakistan scholar just left us last week after spending the better part of a year with us. Dr. Sabeeh Mansoor is Dean of the School of Education at Beacon House National University in Lahore. We will be announcing within the next several weeks our next Pakistan scholar. As part of this heightened interest in Pakistan and attention to Pakistan, we also host other scholars either from Pakistan or working on Pakistan. We have with us right now, in addition to Dr. Mansoor, Dr. Malaya Lodi, whom many of you know from her time here, 2 different occasions as ambassador to the United States. I don't see Malaya at the moment, but I think she'll be here shortly. We also have Dr. Christopher Canlon, who has been a visiting scholar here for the last 10 months. And just this week, we brought to the Wilson Center a new scholar who, while not Pakistani, knows Pakistan very well and will be working on issues relating to and involving Pakistan. That is Pam Constable. There's Pam, the long-time South Asia bureau chief for the Washington Post. Our conference today is another example of what we're trying to do with our Pakistan program. Today's conference follows a conference last year on food security in Pakistan. That conference was preceded by conferences on Pakistan's trade sector, on its water challenges, on its energy challenges. Each of these conferences has resulted in the publication of a substantial report Copies of several of these reports were on the table right outside the door. If you didn't pick a copy up on your way in, please do so on your way out. They're free. You can't always expect to get free stuff anymore. Today and in the conference report, which will be produced in the coming months, we seek to explore a range of issues relating to the challenges and the opportunities offered by Pakistan's demographic profile. As many of you are aware, Pakistan's demographic projections are a little short of staggering. By some estimates, 335 million people by mid-century. Indeed, some estimates are even larger than that. Most people think that it's very likely that Pakistan will gain an additional 80 million people just in the next 20 years. And many people worry that this combination of soaring population growth, youthful demographics, two-thirds of Pakistan's population is under the age of 30, combined with a deeply troubled education system, high unemployment, a dismal economic performance for the most part. This combination poses major risks for Pakistan today and in the years and the decades ahead. Predictably, debates about Pakistan's demographic situation often assume the worst. And I think that that's certainly justified, but fortunately there is another side of the story. If Pakistan's young population can be sufficiently educated, if they can be adequately integrated into the labor force, then the country could achieve a demographic dividend, which will produce both high economic growth and social well-being. So our focus today is both on the dangers ahead for Pakistan because of its demographic profile, but equally on the opportunities. We have enlisted some of the most accomplished experts in the world to discuss these issues with us. I'm looking forward to becoming a lot smarter as a result of their discussions today. Before we turn to our first speaker, let me make a couple of announcements. The first announcement is the one we're now all familiar with. Please cut off your mobile phones, your other electronic devices. Not only because the constant beeping is a discourtesy to our speakers, but also because it interferes with our webcast. So if we want our friends in Pakistan and elsewhere to see this, then we have to cooperate. We'll be moving to a different room, in a different part of the Wilson Center for lunch. Stay tuned for that announcement. But if you step out for a few minutes and come back and this room is empty, we'll be right downstairs in the room one floor below us for lunch and for the afternoon session. We will, during the course of the day, give you a number of opportunities to interact with the speakers and the panelists. Please wait until we get a microphone to you. Again, not only so all in this room can hear, but so that people in the webcast can hear. Identify yourself. You are more than welcome to make interventions and comments, not simply ask questions, but we would ask you to be respectful of everyone else by keeping your comments brief. Now, as you know, putting on a conference like this produces many debts. Our principal debt, of course, is to our speakers, some of whom have come from literally halfway around the world in order to share their experiences and their expertise with us. So let me say right up front how grateful we are to all of our speakers, many of them sitting in the audience, one up here. It's why we're here, and we thank all of you. Secondly, we need to thank, and indeed it's a pleasure to thank, those in Pakistan and the United States and elsewhere who have demonstrated their confidence in the Wilson Center's Pakistan program in the very tangible way of supporting us financially. I want to specifically mention the Fellowship Fund for Pakistan, which is a Karachi-based charitable trust whose support is absolutely indispensable, both for this conference on an annual basis. Their support also makes possible our Pakistan scholar appointments every year. This is a group of public-spirited people in Pakistan who have made it possible for us to do what we do here. The fund is represented here today by a member of their advisory council, Ambassador Bill Milam. Bill was the American ambassador in Islamabad for several years in the late 1990s and early in the previous decade. He is now, I'm pleased to say, a senior scholar here at the Wilson Center. He has recently published a new book looking at Pakistan's evolution over the last 40 years. And he is another example of our commitment to furthering our understanding in this city and this country of Pakistan. I also want to thank other friends at the Wilson Center who have co-sponsored this event today, specifically the Comparative Urban Studies Project and the Environmental Change and Security Program. Let me specifically single out Jeff DeBelco, who will have a role up on the podium later this afternoon, as well as Megan Parker, both of whom provided wise counsel and great assistance to us. Finally, and in some ways most importantly, the Asia Program staff. Anyone who's ever had a managerial position knows that it's the staff who does all the work. I get to stand up here in front of you, but only because my staff has done all the work. Sue, will you raise your hand? Sue Levenstein really is sort of where it all starts for us. And I want all of you to know Sue's important role and thank her when you see her. And then Michael Kugelman. Michael, will you raise your hand? Michael has done about 98% of the conceptualization and organization of this conference, and he's really the guy who should get a lot of the credit. Okay, we have a full day ahead of us. I was just handed one note that I expect means I'm supposed to tell you something else, but I haven't had a chance to read the note yet. So if you'll bear with me for about 12 seconds. Okay, I think that we didn't have enough copies of the speaker biographies out there, and so Sue is now distributing more copies of speaker bios. So I've completed my assignment in that respect. I want to now introduce our opening speaker. When we were casting around for someone to get us started, one name kept popping up, and that was Zeba A. Zeba A is Pakistan Country Director at the Population Council in Islamabad. Prior to joining the council, she was Chief of Research for Demography at the Pakistan Institute of Development Economics. She worked for a number of years as a consultant at the World Bank. She has a career's worth of experience and expertise on demographic trends and patterns and projections. She has looked extensively at the effects of gender and women's status, on maternal and child health, and Pakistan's health service delivery systems. As we were asking people who we needed to have at this conference, Zeba, everybody said you. So we're grateful to have you with us today, and I now invite you to come forward and get us started.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very nice introduction. And I'd like to thank the Woodrow Wilson Center for inviting myself, my colleagues from Pakistan, and also to be focusing on Pakistani demographic issues. It's not often, even within Pakistan, that we spend a day discussing population issues alone. It's usually with something else. I would like to basically... Well, let me try and see where I am. I'd like to do a combination of showing you some slides in the background. I hope that they'll just add to some of the figures and add to my talk. But I would hopefully like you to listen to me rather than to watch the slides, because they're not altogether synchronized. Anyway, the way I see it, Pakistan clearly stands at the crossroad of its destiny for all kinds of reasons. But I'd like to make an argument here today that demography is going to have a huge part to play in the future of Pakistan in the coming 5 to 10 years. 63 years after its formation, Pakistan can either boast itself for having the 6th largest... Sorry? Okay. Pakistan can either boast itself for having the 6th largest population and look forward to utilizing its youthful population to reap a demographic dividend, or it can more realistically see a population size of 175 million, that's what we are today, growing at 2% and reaching 240 million by 2030. The choices are clear. I think that a lot of the speakers are going to address these. What I would like to do is really take stock of where we are, why we ended up the way we are, with some explanations and maybe some speculation for the future. First of all, fertility, whereas mortality in Pakistan declined as early as the 1950s and 60s, fertility was very slow to follow. In fact, fertility decline in Pakistan didn't really start happening till about 1988, and much later than other South Asian countries and even Bangladesh and Iran, whose fertility actually started declining much more rapidly than ours. So whereas we have had an antenatalist policy from 1965, the fact is that nothing really happened in terms of fertility decline until, as I said, the late 80s or even the early 90s. So finally, in about 1991, soon after our first demographic health survey, which was done in 1991, there was much celebration that fertility was finally beginning to decline. It had finally fallen from its levels of over 6.5, and then it actually continued to fall to about 4.2 in a period of 12 years. Interesting things. Urban fertility started declining first, as was expected, but rural fertility also started to decline. Things seem to be quite as we expect. I'm too old, I'm too short.
No, too low.
No, okay. I don't know, I think it's a laptop thing, so I don't know what to do.
We can't elevate her, so we'll get the microphone close to her.
Okay. Is that better? I mean, I'll just look at the slides.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. You're not missing much if you don't say. Okay. Okay. Contraceptive use doubled from 1991 to about 1998. And again, things seem to be following the typical Asian fertility decline, and a renowned scholar called Graffini, along with another renowned scholar called Iqbal Alam, wrote about the fastest decline, fertility decline in Asia in the Population and Development Review. Again, there was room to be excited. We all celebrated. So the 90s were a good era for us. But then the spurt of the decline did not continue. And the last 10, or at least the last 6 years, have seen a slowing down of the pace of decline in fertility, and contraceptive use has practically stagnated. You can see that quite clearly in the red line. And contraceptive use differentials have widened by economic class and urban-rural residents, mirroring the rise and persistent unmet need for family planning of services. For those of you who are not demographers, you'll soon, all day long, you'll hear about unmet need for family planning services. This is the gap between the demand and the supply of services, and the high proportions of dropouts, the difference between those who have ever used contraception. Maybe I should use this. Actually, if you look at things, 1 out of 5, almost 50% of women in Pakistan have now used some form of contraception. But the really puzzling thing is less than 30% are now currently using contraception. Something is wrong about the uptake of modern contraception in Pakistan. And when fertility is seen, the transition is seen through the lenses of economic, education, and residential differential lenses. There are different scenarios for different subsections of society. The rich and educated in Pakistan, I haven't actually shown the most educated, but certainly the rich in Pakistan are practically having the fertility levels of elites anywhere, about roughly over 2. Whereas the poor lag far behind, and here in this case, the poorest would be this group, 5.8. These are levels of fertility that are now, we only see in parts of sub-Saharan Africa. In fact, the countries that are lagging behind in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think the most surprising thing for me in terms of the fertility decline is the fact that we are the most urbanized of countries in South Asia, and yet urbanization doesn't seem to be a driver of lower fertility in Pakistan. If anything, I think that the urban-rural differentials are diminishing over time. There's a sort of convergence happening. And the differential that has emerged to be more visible and wide is this one, the one between the richest and the poorest. In fact, it seems to outweigh the one across the education groups. And my argument again and again will be that once again the differences in the availability of family planning services appear to be the bottleneck in equalizing these fertility differentials. I'd like to argue, and I think there's so many demographers in this room, and Dr. Mehtab, Dr. Sohail Agha, others, that basically maybe this fertility change that we've seen in Pakistan could have actually happened even without the CPR. Certainly the low CPR, contraceptive prevalence rate, doesn't explain current fertility levels of just under 4. So could it be other things? Could it be something like this, the rise in the age at marriage? The rise in age at marriage is a phenomena, I call it the unsung hero of demography of Pakistan. You know, basically the age at marriage has been rising for women steadily, consistently, quite dramatically. This is a chart, it's maybe not showing as dramatic a change because I don't go back to the 60s, but the cingulate mean age in marriage, which is a sort of technical figure which takes into account those women who never get married, has been rising for something like 16.5 to about almost 23, starting in the 60s and in the last 50 years, and without any policies and programs to do this. It's quite independent. It's been rising for men too, but not as dramatically. And age at marriage is probably contributing to at least the tempo of fertility because it raises the age at first birth and probably contributes quite a bit to fertility. Another possibility are abortions. We did this study, the Population Council with the Guttmacher Institute in 2002, and we ourselves were quite surprised that actually this is the 3 range estimates. There are about 1 million abortions amongst mostly married women in Pakistan. 95% we assume are married women, mainly 35 plus with 3 plus children. You won't expect that in an Islamic country where abortion is, well, Yasmeen will talk more to that. It's mainly considered out of the legal framework, though that may be seen differently by people. But it shows and demonstrates the desperation that a lot of women are facing to regulate their fertility. So I'd now like to, having given you this backdrop, maybe talk a little bit, come to the argument that I'm going to present, that there must be reasons why Pakistan's fertility has been slow to change. I mean, there must be some culprits in the room, as I call them. And to me, the first culprit, of course, is I think that population problems or population issues, they're not always problems, population issues. How many are we? How many Afghan refugees do we have? How many people have out-migrated from Pakistan? How many are living in which province, which urban area? Nobody really is following these issues very carefully, except for a few researchers here and there, a few demographers, few statisticians. These issues of placement of population, how fast we are growing, what resources are allocated to various subgroups, are not issues that are taken up in Parliament. They're certainly not even taken up by the media, whereas the media spends hours and hours of airtime discussing sometimes quite trivial issues. But population doesn't seem to grab the attention. I think despite the fact that General Ayub, who was a military dictator, he was, I think, the first leader who actually took into account the fact that there might be an imbalance between resources and population size, and that's when the real spurt of population growth had not happened. And he announced the famous Pakistan Population Program in 1965. An NGO called the Family Planning Association of Pakistan was even earlier in its response and has played its very considerable role alongside. But apart from announcing a program, the Family Planning Association, I do not believe, and this might be a situation of debate, where population issues have been openly debated, or certain the imbibing of whatever the issues is not very wide. It's not widespread. It's amongst a small group. I would say even the group that is very powerful in our country, economists and planners, who should take population issues quite seriously, don't. I think that at the moment, Dr. Saba Khattak is in the room, and I know the new projections we presented for the 10th five-year plan have caused a lot of concern, and the media has taken them up. But it's almost like the doomsday scenario is very appealing. You can blame population for a lot of things that are going wrong, but then you can put them away into denial when there are other more pressing issues, certainly when it's a question of resources. So I do think that we haven't taken them as seriously. And I think the second, let me just point out why, a country like Bangladesh that immediately realizes after its independence, realized that there was a problem of resources vis-a-vis its population, and I think maybe largely to do with its density and its rather limited geographical area, did really take population issues very seriously, did experience a rapid fertility decline because they implemented what they were saying. And Iran, an Islamic country where till 1992 there was real sort of denial of, there was no talk of family planning issues, but the moment a position was taken by Imam Khomeini, fertility did decline. So I think countries that have taken issues seriously, they do experience fertility decline. I'd like to bring out the second culprit in the room. I think that is really basically international policies and programs. I think there have been a lot of fluctuation in the position, and Pakistan being very dependent on donor funds, donor thinking. This is moving faster than I expected, but I think in 1965, there was really makes a nice slide, emergence of this population control thought, swung to 1974 World Population Conference, where development was considered the best contraceptive. In 84, mainly the US wanted to bring back family planning for third world issues. But I'd really like to go back to 1994. That was our last major conference on population and development in Cairo. That was I think that might have been the hiatus in terms of population and development issues being woven together, and I do praise what happened in bringing so many world leaders together to dwell on these issues. But the outcome was very mixed. I don't think that, I can't remember how many pages the agenda was. I think it was about 200 pages. It was fully adopted by Pakistan, even though we are a signatory, because we would have done much more in intersectoral, intersectoral issues. The reproductive health agenda was what really emerged as the dominant one. And within reproductive health was a whole host of things along with family planning. At the same time, there was the emergence of the HIV lobby, as I would call it, because there was a huge mortality issue, the epidemic of HIV. So we were competing, family planning and fertility issues started competing for rather dwindling resources. And the next slide, I think, shows that how donor assistance really was going largely to funding HIV/AIDS programs, perhaps correctly, because it was a large epidemic. But all I want to say is that this did affect what happened in Pakistan. For about 10 years, Pakistan funded its own program, but it was probably not enough, really not enough for a country that was growing at that stage. And then thirdly, I would say the most important thing is really human development. I think in Pakistan, development has really been focused very much on physical infrastructure. I think we like, our planners like roads, they like dams, power plants and so on. And there's nothing bad with that because they certainly improve the quality of life. But if only human development and investment had been commensurate, or even half of what has been invested in physical development, I think we'd be very different. And I think I don't have to explain these figures, only point out to you that really literacy levels, it is important that actually literacy of women has probably improved in percentage terms more dramatically than it has for men. But I think more important is the current now, the levels of enrollment in primary school. I think they're far too low. And I would say that even I've already made comparisons with Pakistan, with Bangladesh and Iran. I'd like to bring up the case of India. I have a colleague in the room, Dr. Anwar Jain, who was with us in Pakistan last week. And we're talking about India and Pakistan, and of course, in reference to this talk. And he's worked on the same demographic dividend in India. And it's the same case. India was one of the first countries to institute a family planning program, almost the same time as us, I think. Yet there are different degrees of fertility decline and implementation of the same program in the north and south states. And of course, we know that it's largely to do with social development and other indicators that are so different for places like Kerala, which have gone way beyond replacement fertility, and places like Bihar, UP, Jharkhand, which probably resemble more like Pakistan. So I think this underlying factor of social development really determines how well or badly you can implement policies, I think, and whether it impedes progress is without saying. The rainbows, let's have some lightness in the room. I think Pakistan has done some quite remarkable things recently, and I would say mainly they came in the 90s. There was a 65 program announcement, and there was a sort of lull. Of course, the Zia era, I would say, is the darkest era. We don't do anything for about 10 years. But one of the rainbows was the ICPD and the attendance of world leaders. And Benazir Bhutto, after some former Prime Minister and former late Prime Minister, did attend this conference and made a big mark there. She made the statement that actually brought out the whole importance of planned pregnancies, and the fact implying that there were unwanted pregnancies, and that was an undesirable thing. And this also led to the formation of what is one of the largest public sector programs in health across the world, the Lady Health Worker Program. I think it's a remarkable program that was instituted soon after she returned. And one of the things I want to point out to you, this was launched by the government of Pakistan and with its own funds. I remember very clearly because I was working for the bank in those days, and they're not very happy about this. And that continues, and these women provide community-based services in rural areas and slums, urban slums in Pakistan, and it did make a difference. There was a policy, we started working on a new policy, and a new population policy was announced. We started work in 98, it was announced in 2002. It had all the elements of success. There was a sort of renaissance about population issues, and we did see a decline around them by chance or design. The second rainbow we had when we started working on the Vision 2030 for Pakistan, quite accidentally, we found that dependency ratios were declining quite rapidly, that the age structures were suddenly becoming favorable. Economists started liking demographers again. There was a bit of good news that we had to offer. And the good news was really rather obvious. I mean, age structures were moving favorably. The sort of what shows up as a brownish sort of area where the working age population expected to go up in proportions and in size. And dependency ratios, what we call dependency ratios, those numbers of people who are dependent, it's basically the proportion of working age children to the working age population was declining and would continue to decline for maybe 20, even up to 2040. So there was an era of hope, and economists really got excited. The Pakistan Development Forum of 2007 chose this as its theme. But there was again a superficial sort of acceptance of this opportunity, not a realization that there was much more that needed to be done. While the working age population will double, there's a lot more that needs to be done to provide jobs. And for the demographic transition to turn into reality, and rather than just to remain a sort of flash in the background, hard work was entailed. But the mechanisms had begun to be seen. I mean, the demographic dividend was taking effect, but really basically it was happening amongst what we call the non-poor groups. The poor still have, oh boy, shut this up. The poor still have large families. The non-poor have much, and they're feeling these effects. They have more members in the 15-plus age groups. They have lesser children. But this change will come obviously first to urban areas, to the non-poor households, and much slower to the rest of Pakistan, which lives in rural areas and belongs to. And there are huge savings, the more working age members, and this is all recent data that we put together from our economic surveys and our standard of living surveys. So I want to get now to the crux of the matter and hopefully wind up. Basically, what we need to do is speeden up the fertility decline. It's far too slow. If you're going to have a long, drawn-out fertility decline, the benefits are just not going to be quite the same. We need to invest in human development, and we need to create new skills. Current level of skills is just not appropriate, even if we are talking about our young people being able to be flexible and migrate to other countries, and even to enter new sectors within Pakistan. And of course, we need to ensure more jobs. But particularly, I think what I'd like to concentrate on is really we need new jobs. We need to induct more women in the labor force for all kinds of reasons. I really want to underscore that whereas fertility has declined, unwanted fertility has actually risen. And the work is cut out. It's so clear. It's to cut out, reduce this, or eliminate unwanted fertility, because these are women themselves in Pakistan who are saying they want. And more of them are located in the rural areas, the ones who do not, much larger proportion, 1.1 child unwanted compared to 0.8 child in urban areas. And even though it has come down, it's really quite high. And again, the uneducated and the poorest quintile, this is probably something that you'd like to focus on. 1.6, almost 2 children unwanted, according to the Pakistan Demographic Health Survey of 2007. Whereas millions of, we've already pointed out that there are millions of young people who are entering the labor force, well, a large proportion are those that will never get a chance. The gap between those who will be enrolled in school and the gap that will enter, this huge gap, even if we accelerate our secondary enrollment rate, it's going to be huge. So these young people are going to be at a disadvantage. And there is already a gap between the number of jobs. This is the availability of the labor force and the gap between them. But one good thing is that unemployment rates have not gone up. Mind you, the latest data that I did have was 2007 and 12. But the unemployment is already beginning to be concentrated in younger age groups. So there are hints that already the surge of the labor force is being felt, but luckily it's still not that huge. The issue about women is very important, I think. Labor force participation rates have gone up barely from about 15 to about 20%. This is so low compared to everywhere else, and you need at least 50% of women to be in the labor force and employed for so many benefits that ensue once women are in the labor force, but also for the demographic dividend to take place. And perhaps it's my second last slide. I think that Pakistan really needs to diversify. Of course, this is our mainstay, agriculture, and I know Dr. Burki is so much more qualified to talk about that, but I think we need the other sectors to grow. Otherwise, I don't think we can ever expect the job expansion that we want. So the immediate agenda, I'm not going to dwell on the long-term agenda. The immediate agenda is obviously that we need more stability and security, and we need job expansion. But in a way, you can't have one without the other. I think that we also need a size of population we can manage. And for that reason, I think we do need to reduce our fertility, but also for a whole host of reasons, because women want fewer children. They're desperate. And it is their right, and I think that we are missing out on providing these rights. I think family planning services have to be made available. Visitors to Pakistan all point out that they cannot believe that we have only about, I think, 17,000 public outlets that are also not fully providing family planning services for a population of 170 million. It's just unheard of. And of course, those are concentrated in rural areas. I think we have to really, this is where the funds should go. If we have to choose, then it should be in rural communities. The schooling also I would focus, and I think we have to give every child a chance in Pakistan, and I think we should definitely double our labor force participation rates for women. Just an end point observation, I think that when I say that right at the beginning when we stand at the crossroads, I think the choices are clear. I mean, on the one hand, we can continue and just throw our hands up, the doom and gloom can prevail, and let things go on as usual. But I think that all these problems have already come home to roost. They will be even worse down the line. I think some hard decisions, and I think I would expect the donor community to also focus on funding these hard decisions. I think these are not, they're not things that we should ponder over. These are rather obvious things. Providing family planning services to those who desperately require them, especially in the rural areas, and to provide full enrollment in primary school. I think these are not these are not hard decisions. I think these are actually no choices the way I see them, but they are going to determine where we end up in the next 5 to 10 years. So I'll end here. Thank you.
Well, I know the audience agrees with me that that was just as good, just as helpful as we had been led to expect. Thank you, Zeba, for getting us off to a really good start. We have a number of people standing up in the back, and I would encourage you, there's some seats down here in front. I would encourage you to come on down and find a place to sit. Go ahead and ignore the reserved seating signs. We don't want you standing in the back. It's delightful to see that we have filled the largest room in the Wilson Center. I think it says something about the importance of the topic. It clearly says something about the caliber of the speakers we have today, and so we're glad to see you. Zeba, you had a section and a slide entitled The Rainbows, and I was hoping to hear about a rainbow which you did not mention, so maybe it's not a rainbow. We're going to have other people later in the day talk about this, but can you briefly talk about the approach and the policy and the attitudes of the current government? Why was this not one of your rainbows?
A tough one. I think Dr. Saba is going to take this up later on, right? We've talked about...
Yes, yeah. We'll get back to this again and again, but I thought maybe you could at least get us started.
No, I think maybe you're right. I think I stand corrected. There is a 2010 policy document, a population policy, that is going to be proposed to the cabinet. But while this policy document was being crafted, recrafted, I think we're on our maybe 10th version of that population. Dr. Nizam is in the room. He's been involved with the population policy also. While we are recrafting the policy, the ground has shifted, beneath us, basically in terms of the very, very severe resource crunch that we are facing, that the government is facing. And also, I think because of in the form of the 18th Amendment, and what, the responsibilities have also shifted. So much changed dramatically that it hardly appears like a rainbow. It's almost like a big sandstorm that came and swept all our ideas away. But I think that I like to believe actually that we're on to something good, and the shift will be much better in terms of the delivery of family planning services. So it will be the third rainbow if it all works out, because the responsibility of providing good quality family planning services will be more shared amongst the private sector and public sector according to this policy, and because resources are moving in that direction, and be delivered by the provincial departments. By provinces ultimately will have to take more responsibility than than was being taken by the federal government. So I think we've seen with education, with everything, when services are delivered on the ground by provinces, they are better, and when they're delivered by districts and they take the responsibility, the narrower the subunit, the better. And I think that the clarification in terms of the Ministry of Population Welfare, there is this ministry that's rather small and by itself, which has always felt that big responsibility of this population problem on its hands, will dissolve. I think that this responsibility will become more shared, because I think their role, again, I hope Saba, you'll rescue me on this, she knows what's happening in terms of decisions, seems to be receding, in fact, if not dissipating altogether. So I think there is a rainbow, but there's a sort of storm before that rainbow, and we are really in the eye of the storm at the moment. I mean, literally, the meeting after meeting on the population policy, on the 10th five-year plan, on what's available in terms of funds, and what the 18th Amendment means, and I hope that she'll take that up, means in terms of whether ministries will continue to exist in Islamabad at all. So there's a huge policy arena shift. Whether it emerges as a rainbow, my bet would be that it will. So
good. Well, I mean, that's an optimistic note, and I'm pleased to hear that. Okay, let's get you into the conversation. If you'd raise your hand, and we'll start right there, and then we'll go over to the gentleman there next. Bryce, microphone? No, right here, right in front of you, Bryce, the lady.
Good morning. Hazel Denton, Johns Hopkins. Following on specifically from your comments, as you said, there was great excitement when it was recognized that there was a potential for a demographic dividend. Could you say a little bit more about how that excitement needs to be tempered by reality and how that is being discussed within policy circles? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Actually, we were part of a group that wrote a chapter in the Vision 2030 about global realities. And we actually argued that this demographic dividend, there's so much excitement that we could actually it would just not benefit us nationally, that we could actually fill in some of the gaps that other neighboring countries, China was one that we threw out, might have a deficit of working age population at that time. So all the pluses were taken, and that's what the excitement was about, and of course the decline in dependency ratios. What happened then was troubling to some of us, demographers, because the economists ran with the idea, and I mentioned that there was a Pakistan Development Forum meeting which was called Reaping the Demographic Dividend, and it was sort of misunderstood that it was automatic, that the growth in the telecom and banking sector was because there was a demographic boom, and too many things were attributed to the demographic dividend that were not actually connected to it. So then the note of caution came in, and the need for more careful analysis of what was actually happening. And it turned out that the benefits of the demographic dividend, and I tried to show you were very much really only beginning to happen in urban areas and amongst the very rich groups. So it was not very widespread. It was just something that was there and was likely to happen, but with X, Y, and Z. And I think you're asking the question about X, Y, and Z. And for that, you need employment opportunities within the country. You need savings to go up. They're generally going up, were going up at least at that time. You need savings to go up. You need women to enter the labor force. And of course, you need an educated labor force. So laying those out brought a little bit of dampening to the excitement. But I think now the economists and planners do realize, because we had several papers and discussions and seminars, and I think that note of caution has now crept in. So it's not so touted anymore. But yet the opportunity is there. I mean, it's real. Given the political situation and our economic situation, it's looking a bit bleak. Again, I'm hoping Dr. Burki, who follows, I think, will talk about that.
Okay. Gentleman over here.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Tufail Mohammed from Peshawar, a pediatrician in Pakistan. Well, my question is about your last part of your just comment, and that is about the rainbow and the sandstorm. Because after the 18th constitutional amendment, there are some serious concerns regarding the program, especially the funding as far as the provincial governments are concerned, the contraceptive security, the human resource development, the advocacy and communication part of it. Because by and large, it is believed that currently the provincial government probably don't have the capacity just to take on these responsibility. So what impact you envisage on the program in the short term? And you think that what would you suggest to be done just to thwart all those unfavorable impacts?
Again, thank you for that question. You know, you and I were both at the same meeting, I think, where we were discussing this, the provinces and the federal ministry in Islamabad. And the analogy was made, I think, maybe by Dr. Mohsina, if I recall correctly. It's the relationship between a parent and children. The parents never want the children to leave home because they think, God, they're going to go, astray, and they won't know how to live on their own, and they won't be able to support themselves. And the children are just generally dying to get out, but maybe they're not terribly equipped. But everyone, it is the way things are, and it's usually a healthy move. I think that the provinces, once given the responsibility, will write it into their budgets. There will be a period of uncertainty, but I think it's the same pool of resources. It's just that who will have it. And shouldn't resources be closer to the place where they are to be spent, which is in the provinces or even in the districts? So I really believe it's a move in the right direction. You talked about contraceptive commodity security. It's a big issue in Pakistan, and I would like to take advantage of being here, that the donors are talking about it, but a lot of donors have had policies against supporting commodities worldwide. But I think in the case of Pakistan, I think there is an immediate commodity shortage. And I do hope, I believe there's another major donor in the room, I do believe they are revising, USAID has revised its policy a little bit in the case of Pakistan. They are providing, I think, support for 10 million or 12 million. But I think that it is an issue. There are shortages. The shortages aren't nationwide. We've discovered they're particularly in certain parts of the country. I believe Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and in Sindh, these are two provinces. Punjab seems to be able to purchase its own contraceptives because it's better off. But I think there is this no commodity, no program issue, which is quite separate from the constitutional 18th Amendment. I think that's a different issue. That's a national issue, that we do not have the money to support our contraceptives. So, but I would still like to come back to the answer that I guess, all in all, I'm an optimist. I do think this change is for the good. It's also healthy that the health departments, the health sector generally in Pakistan has been on remote control on this issue. They don't see it as their issue because there's this Ministry of Population Welfare and there's a population policy that's supposed to take care of this. And I think this is great negligence because they have the greater number of outlets, the 15,000 static outlet, 100,000 lady health workers, And if there's more responsibility by health, I do think we are going to get more rapid change in Pakistan.
Good. Good. Back in the back.
Nizamuddin from the University of Gujarat, Pakistan. I don't think I'm that optimistic about what happened after the 18th Amendment. I believe that the Pakistan program is going to go downhill because I think there are several provinces, but they may not continue to support the program if you federalize as they've been doing, if there's no central support system available to them. So I think we need to start already building how do you want to work with provinces. The donors particularly have to start building. How will they support the northwest frontier or Sindh or Balochistan where they may not be willing to spend the money on population programs. So my feeling that this is a very severe or serious revolution had taken place in 18th Amendment, which really takes programs like population program into great risk of being lost in the political debates between federal and provincial differences. Good thing about it that the provinces are authorized to negotiate foreign aid from foreign agencies. So if that is taken up by foreign agencies, that will help. But they have to start really working with the provincial government now to see the program is not lost out in this debate of federal and versus the provincial authority and autonomy. So I would suggest that we need to start a very strong lobby with the provincial governments now to start working on population program, because the population welfare ministry may not be able to pull that force which they had before. So I think we need to take this account while we're discussing. I know there are some people in the afternoon session will be talking about this issue, but I want to this that I'm not that optimistic at this stage what happens to the population program in Pakistan.
Here in the aisle.
My name is Obaidur Rab from Population Council, Bangladesh. Dr. Zeba, the two things you mentioned about unintended pregnancy and number of abortion, which is more or less same in Bangladesh also. Approximately 1/3 of pregnancy is unintended, and approximately 1 million of pregnancies are terminated through different means. Having together for 25 years and now separated for 35 years, if you look at the history of Bangladesh or Pakistan program, it is the intensity of the worker who contributed most of the fertility decline in these countries. So if you think about the huge infrastructure in the health system, where you have 120,000 lady health visitors and 15,000 service centers, compared to Bangladesh, where we are only 23,000 health workers or family planning workers and only 4,000 centers, I think there is enough infrastructure which you can easily utilize to reduce your, or make available contraceptive uses in the rural areas. But why the health ministry is not getting involved in this system for last 20 years? I spent 8 years in Pakistan, early 90s. We were discussing the same thing, and now in 2010 we are discussing again the same issues, that not bringing the health infrastructure to providing family planning services. Is there any political problem or then an institutional problem?
There's a turf problem. I think I mentioned it earlier that family planning has never been considered part of the health responsibility of the health sector. But the only divergence is the lady health worker program, because that was a direct outcome of ICPD. And the lady health worker program is actually called the National Program for Family Planning and Primary Health Care. And these workers started doing a wonderful job when we had this period of contraceptive uptake. But then they were overloaded because they were the only women in those rural communities that were able to reach households. So they were overloaded with all kinds of things, particularly immunization and particularly polio drives. I think they're even supposed to do a little bit on HIV/AIDS. So I don't know. Everything is sort of overloaded them. And there's been a recent evaluation that has woken everyone up that they're not doing much family planning. The health system, the static units and the ministry and the departments of health have not really risen to the occasion. That is our main issue right now, because we are now linking it that birth spacing is the best way to, this whole Women Deliver conference is about that, the best way to achieve the MDG 4 and 5 in particular. And I think that I would like to believe, again, I seem to be an optimist. I think I have fellow optimists in the room also. I do believe the tide has turned. I think it's a question of now tweaking a couple of things. The capacity, I think Dr. Tufail brought up capacity. Just upgrading the capacity a bit, ensuring the commodities. I do think Pakistan is poised for pretty much a change because the demand is created. It's not, we don't need to do endless advertising and creating demand. And I know that nobody has talked about, and myself, about religion. A lot of people think that religious taboos stand in the way, but I quite honestly believe that, that really religion is not the constraining factor in Pakistan. Maybe publicly, but I think the private reality is that there's a lot of poverty. It's hard to bring up children. People have higher aspirations for the quality of the lives of their children. And I think the state in particular is failing to provide those services. I'd like to say that the private sector is also failing to provide these services.
Good. Yes, right here in the middle. Mm-hmm.
Hello, my name is Martha Kelly, and I'm a pension advisor who's worked in Pakistan in the last 5 years. And it's one topic that you haven't touched on, but I hear people saying that we continue to have so many children because there is no source of old age income once we're beyond working years. The national social security system covers less than 8% of the labor force. The agriculture is out, the textile industry is out, the carpet industry is out, most of the financial institution industries aren't covered. So I've always thought that the two are connected, even though there's a wide gap in between birth and death. At one point, pensions and having an implementable national policy would trickle down.
I think it would make a huge difference. I would like to, I wish that was something one could envisage happening quite soon in the short run. I assume it will happen in a 10-year span, that this pension and social insurance would take place. I know there's much going on in terms of activity, but it's unlikely given that a lot of, as I showed you in my slide, a lot of employment is outside of the formal sector. You're working on it, you're the expert. But even if it were to touch a few sections of society, I think it would make a difference. You're right, there's a lot of insecurity, and children are a good form of investment. But at the same time, there is there's strong evidence, we've done a lot of qualitative research, where people are struggling because they want better quality children. I think they want healthier and fewer children, regardless. They're less selfish about themselves. I think they want to see a better future. We've interviewed adolescents and youth all over Pakistan, and they also want to, they're not so worried about anything. They want to contribute towards society in terms of, household income and in terms of betterment. There's a lot of positive energy. The way I see it, Pakistan is just, poised for all kinds of changes, but the opportunities are not. And of course, given our international situation, we're really so constrained. I think I didn't want to talk on and on about that because the constraining factor, I assume all the other speakers will speak to that. But sure, I think China is another one that's working, but even they haven't worked out the social insurance. I've been talking to people who work. So it's a difficult one to roll out, but I'm so glad you're working on that in Pakistan.
Mm-hmm. Down here in the front. Mm-hmm.
Good morning. Heather Stone from University of Maryland. Thank you for your comments. Do you think the move towards provincial responsibility for family planning will be the critical issue to lowering the high fertility rates and lack of access to contraceptive use in the rural areas? Or what other aspects do you think, in your view, are the most important?
I do think that generally the provision of services is the most important factor right now, because in the 80s there wasn't a palpable demand for these services. The restrictions, the obstacles were huge. We did endless studies on other things. But now I do think, as I said, there is a concrete demand. So I do think the services. Now, whether it'll be the public sector that'll we are looking at options, the private sector. There are a lot of providers in the private sector, and many of the, not the most remote and rural areas, that has to be the public provision of services. But I think that the private sector can play a huge role. And I don't mean the traditional that there'll be an MD sitting there with the perfect clinic. We are talking about improvising. There are lady health visitors, there are midwives, there are, even male doctors can play a role, pediatricians and so on, and hakims and homeopaths. So I do think that we have to really capitalize on all the services. Provincial responsibility, the reason why I say is that unless you own a responsibility, unless you have the responsibility, why will you put that in your budget? Why would the Chief Minister of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa be even aware that there is a population problem unless he has to allocate part of his budget to services and family planning and understands the issue? I want to say that to Dr. Nizam, it's allowing I'm glad that you put it in the rainbow list, that it allows whoever, people like us, room through the door to lobby and advocate and highlight this issue as important for all our other development goals, and particularly, I would say, for our political stability. If we are just too many and the quality is, the way it is, with very low levels of education, we can but implode. There's no option. So I think that if a province owns its own, I have 50 million and I have that many resources, and for this I have to. I think that it's you'll get better efficiencies in terms of the delivery of services. That's my own belief. I think it has been the case elsewhere as well. Decentralization.
In the middle, the lady there.
Good morning. Congratulations on your presentation. You said that one of the
You want to introduce yourself, please?
I'm sorry. Milka Dina from Pathfinder International. You said one of the hard decisions is to enroll girls and boys into schools. However, for the last 10 years, we have seen that only madrasas are growing in Pakistan with very doubtful quality of education. How do you envision girls and boys enrolling in schools?
Milka, where do you get your information from? I don't think that's true. I don't think madrasas are the only one. I showed you an increase in enrollment rates for girls. In fact, in urban areas, it's almost gender parity, I think, though, of course, long way to go. But in rural areas, the problem is the lack of schools. About 30% of communities, we did a national survey some while back, but 30% of communities had no primary school for girls. I think it's something like 50% of rural communities don't have a middle school. Where you don't have a middle school, it pulls down primary and school rates also for all kinds of reasons. I keep arguing it's the state's responsibility to provide the schools. I don't think the madrasa, there is maybe quite a few madrasas, and it is a form of social protection in the sense that the poorest of the poor sometimes go to madrasas because they also provide food, clothing, etc. I don't think the only spurt of growth is in madrasa schools. Again, my colleagues are so much better informed than me, but the numbers, there was a recent survey, and I think even a census of madrasa, they're not that numerous. So it's really, if you want to pick up, things from Fox News or somewhere, and quote some study like that. But I don't think that, I can give you figures, and I'd be happy you keep coming to Pakistan. I'll give you the figures to back my point. But I think that there has been an increase in schools for girls and boys, but it's not enough. It's not enough because the numbers are so daunting. The other thing is that we've shown purely that through qualitative research, where there is a girls' school, obviously you'll get much higher enrollment rates, and everyone willing, because there's a community effect as well of sending, and a dynamic sets off, accepting girls' schooling.
We're going to take one more question. Sabeeh.
Sabra Qureshi, independent consultant. Thank you, Zeba, for a brilliant presentation. Just a quick question. That was a rather alarming figure you mentioned on abortions. And I wondered, given the fact that we know that they're still being done illegally, and in many cases not by very qualified personnel, are there some figures on any kind of mortality or resulting from these abortions? And sort of a related question, is the whole issue of female feticide, which we see rising in India, is that a problem in Pakistan, and is this happening increasingly in terms of aborting female fetuses?
Let me answer your last question first. No, the answer is no. It's not yet, because there isn't that sharp level of fertility control, perhaps. I won't say that it's never likely to happen, but it's not driven by female feticide. That because we asked our interviewers when we did the study, so we did about 5 parts of it with the Packard funds. There was no mention, I mean, maybe one case here and there, female there was an ultrasound and so on was driven. These are all women, majority of them, as I said, 70% were women who had 3 or more children, who were 35 plus, who were really doing it to control marital fertility. That's the answer. The alarming proportion, yes, these are, as I said, 890,000 a year is probably the lower estimate. We had 3 estimates. We went for the lower one to be cautious. It's probably more like 1 million. And that was 2002. Probably the numbers may have even increased. Sorry, I missed what your point was. They're illegal? Yeah, well, they are outside the legal, but as Dr. Sadika is in the room and she can answer this question very well, she always says that no, she doesn't know of any case of any doctor or midwife or something who has been actually had a case against her for performing an abortion. I don't think this law is ever implemented. So they may be illegal, but they're more or less happening. But the more important thing is that they're happening under unsavory circumstances, like you said. And the study that we did is based on Guttmacher Institute methodology. I won't go into it because of shortage, but it's based on really estimates, direct estimates, and then building from that of the morbidities attached. There were 250,000 women who ended up in some facility with some post-abortion complication. And that's how you build this estimate. So you're right, and the mortality figure Dr. Sadika can answer, but I think that we were surprised that the demographic health survey did not show such high mortality from abortion. We're quite pleasantly surprised, I suppose.
Well, Zeba, I think we could go on for a good long time, but unfortunately it's time to bring up, to terminate this session. Join me, if you will, in expressing our appreciation to Zeba.